In the fall of 2002, 19-year-old Gemma Houghton moved into her dorm room at the very prestigious University of Manchester in England to begin her freshman year. Her first couple of months at the school were relatively uneventful. She spent all of her time focusing on her studies, and so she really had not gone out and met any new people. But in early 2003, so about halfway through her freshman year, she was standing outside of her dorm when this boy she had never met before walked up to her and introduced himself. He was this tall, very handsome, very charming guy. He said his name was Ian Redmond. He was a senior at the school, and he in fact lived in the same building that she did, and so he just wanted to introduce himself. Now, Gemma was not looking for a boyfriend, but she was immediately attracted to Ian, and Ian would later say the feeling was mutual. This chance encounter would ultimately blossom into a full-fledged romantic relationship, one that would ultimately lead to Ian 6 years later proposing to Gemma on Christmas Eve 2009. That same year they got engaged, the couple, who had diligently saved money for years and years and years, were able to pool their money and buy a house together. It was not a very nice house. It was a fairly beat-up cottage in this little town in England that would need a lot of work, but Ian and Gemma were actually very excited to do the work. They looked at this as an opportunity to make the house exactly the way they wanted it, and it was a chance for them to spend some quality time together. So for the next 2 years, during all of their free time, Ian and Gemma would work on their home, and then finally in August of 2011, right before their actual wedding day, they finished the renovation. Their home is done. And so they get married, and then literally right after their wedding, instead of going right into a honeymoon, they just moved right into their dream home that night. And so for the next couple of days, the newlyweds got to enjoy being husband and wife for the first time inside of their dream home, and then it was time to go on the honeymoon. In addition to having set aside money for the down payment on their home, the couple had also set aside money for this honeymoon. They wanted it to be an amazing vacation. And so what they decided to do for their honeymoon was to go to Seychelles, which is this island nation in the Indian Ocean, which many say has the most beautiful beaches in the world. So on August 10th, the couple hops on a plane and they fly to Seychelles. And when they land, they check into their resort, which is this unbelievable place that overlooks this perfect beach with white sand and crystal clear waters. And then after getting checked in, the couple goes down to a restaurant and they're having a bite to eat. And as they're sitting there, they're probably thinking to themselves, this is going to be the best vacation ever. During the first week of their trip, the couple was very active, spending lots of time exploring the island and going out on different excursions and going to lots of restaurants. They were just all over the place. And so come Tuesday, August 16th, which was the start of their second week and final week of this honeymoon, the couple was kind of tired from all the activity. And so they decided they would just have a lazy day at the beach that day. And so the couple grabbed their swimsuits and their towels and their chairs, and they left the resort and headed down to the beach right outside. And then after finding a decent spot on the sand, they set up their chairs and towels, put their stuff down, and Gemma, she laid down on one of the chairs to begin sunbathing, and Ian, he grabbed his fins and his snorkel, and he kissed Gemma on the cheek and said he was going to go down to the water and go for a swim. Gemma remembers watching Ian as he walked across the beach and stopped in front of the water and put on his big fins and got his snorkel on, and then he kind of awkwardly duck walked his way into the water. And Gemma remembers just smiling and laughing to herself, watching him awkwardly do this, and then thinking to herself how lucky she was to be married to such an amazing guy. She really loved him so much. After Ian had finally gotten into the water and had begun his snorkeling journey, Gemma laid back and began to doze off to sleep. A little while later, though, Gemma suddenly woke up to the sound of what almost sounded like someone sneezing really, really loudly. And so instinctively, she sat up and scanned the waterline for her husband, but all she saw were other tourists in the water swimming and snorkeling and doing all sorts of stuff. She couldn't find Ian. And then she heard a male voice calling out for help, and it was coming off to the right towards the top of the beach, pretty far away from her. And she turned and she saw Ian. Ian was about 60 feet off of the sand, so he's well out into the water, and he appeared to be kind of hunched forward with his arm kind of in the water, and he's waving his other arm in the air. It was like he was stuck on something, and before Gemma could get up and run to him or help him in any way, Ian just begins to scream at the top of his lungs. When Ian began screaming, there was a surgeon who was also on vacation at this beach who was in a boat near where Ian was. He hears the scream and he boats over to Ian, and he and the guy who was in the boat with him manage to pull Ian out of the water. They get him on the boat, and Ian is alive and he's conscious, but he is missing his entire left arm. He's missing the majority of his left thigh, and there was a huge chunk missing from his midsection. It would turn out Ian had been attacked by a bull shark, one of the most aggressive sharks in the world. That sneezing sound that Gemma had heard that had startled her awake was the sound Ian had made through his snorkel when the shark bit down on him. The surgeon rushed Ian to the shore and pulled him out and got him onto the sand and began trying to save his life. At the same time, Gemma had come running up the beach, and she managed to push through the quickly forming crowd, and she drops down next to her husband. And Ian at this point is alive and he's conscious. He's very badly hurt, but he's looking up and he's clearly making eye contact with Gemma. And Gemma, she's looking down at her husband and she's making clear eye contact with him, and they don't really say much. It was like this horrible moment where all they could do was just be in the moment together. And so during this kind of silent acknowledgement, Ian would ultimately pass away. It would turn out, over the past few weeks, there had been a rash of shark attacks at this beach, including one other fatal attack on another tourist. Because shark attacks in Seychelles were so unheard of, they believed this had to be the work of one rogue bull shark. That was the one shark that was doing all of these attacks. And so because this shark had not been captured or killed, the country had actually instituted a temporary ban on swimming at this beach and a few other beaches. But for whatever reason, the ban had not been communicated effectively to the tourists, nor had it been enforced on the tourists. And so Gemma and Ian had no idea the water was a dangerous place to be. They just looked out and saw other tourists swimming around and believed it was totally safe, when in reality, it obviously wasn't. Gemma would quickly return to England, and she would host her husband's funeral in the same church she and he had been married in 10 days earlier. In 1986, 35 million Americans went to see the brand new movie Crocodile Dundee, which was a comedy that starred this very capable and rugged Australian crocodile hunter who goes to New York City. One of the 35 million Americans who saw this film was a 24-year-old model from Virginia named Ginger Meadows. And after seeing this film, Ginger felt inspired to actually go to Australia to see it for herself because it looked so amazing in this movie. So a couple of months later, in March of 1987, Ginger, by herself, hops on a plane and flies to Perth, which is a major city in Western Australia. And her plan was she would land in Australia and then work odd jobs to make a little bit of cash, and then use that cash to fund her travels all over the country. And then at some point, after she was tired of doing that, she would head back to the United States. So she lands in Perth, and immediately she sees her first opportunity to make some money. There had been this huge sailing competition in the city leading up to the weekend she arrived there. And so she saw all these luxury yachts anchored at all these docks along the coastline. And Ginger's thinking to herself, you know, these huge ships, they have crews that work on them basically full time. Maybe one of these boats could use an extra set of hands. And so Ginger, who was very friendly and outgoing, she went right down to one of these docks and she stopped in front of the very first yacht she saw, which was this huge luxury 100-foot yacht. And she introduced herself to the captain of this boat. And she said, hey, you know, can I hitch a ride with you guys to the next place you're going? And in exchange, I'll work for you. And as it happened, the captain was actually looking for another crew member to assist their chef. And so he said, okay, well, can you cook? And Ginger said, yeah, I'm a great cook. And he said, okay, well, you're hired. You can be the chef's assistant. And so Ginger, she climbs on board and she meets the rest of the 5 other crew members, including the chef who she'd be working with. And the chef's name was Jane, and those two would become very close. And then shortly after Ginger had come aboard, the captain cast off their lines and they headed out to sea. Their next stop was going to be New Guinea, which was roughly 14 days of travel away. After about a week at sea, the captain realized they were dangerously low on fresh water. And so he decided to take a detour and turn east and head inland along this river system that would bring them to this large freshwater pool, which he also knew had this huge waterfall that dumped down into it. And so he figured they could go right underneath this waterfall waterfall and fill up their jugs with all this fresh water and then head back out and they'd be good. So on the morning of March 29th, the captain anchored the yacht out at sea near the mouth of this river system, and then he lowered the yacht's dinghy, which is a smaller, more agile boat. And once that was in the water, he, Ginger, Jane, and the rest of the crew, they hop in this dinghy along with all these large empty water jugs, and they begin making their way towards this river. And so they're traveling up this river for a little while, and then finally they get to this huge freshwater pool, and right in front of them is this amazing waterfall, and everybody is just totally awestruck by this waterfall. It's like a gem in the middle of nowhere, because they're in very rugged Australia at this point. And so the captain, he brings the dinghy right near the base of the waterfall, and one by one they hold up their water jugs and they fill them with fresh water, and then they're about to turn and go back out to sea and get back on their yacht when the captain thinks to himself, you know what, we've been at sea for 7 days straight, it's been very monotonous, maybe it would be a good thing to stick around here for a little bit longer and maybe even hike up to the top of this waterfall and enjoy the view and kind of enjoy the scenery before we head back out to sea. And so he says to his crew, hey, do you guys want to go to the top of this waterfall? And everyone agrees it's a great idea, with the exception of Jane. She did not feel like hiking to the top of this waterfall. She said she would stay down in the dinghy and wait for them. Now, this pool is basically surrounded on all sides by just pure cliff face. There really is no place to land this dinghy. There's no flat surfaces. You basically have cliffs that go directly into water, and then also you have the river that feeds back out to the ocean. So the captain brings the dinghy right up against the cliff face right next to this waterfall, and he and Ginger and the other crew members not named Jane climb out of the dinghy onto this cliff face, and they begin climbing, literally climbing up this wall towards the top of the waterfall. Now, everyone was able to do it except for Ginger. She kept slipping on the rocks. It was very steep. It seemed kind of dangerous. And so at some point, she abandons the idea and goes back down to the dinghy with Jane, and the captain and the rest of the crew, they continue up towards the top. And so as Ginger and Jane are sitting in the dinghy watching the other crew members making their way up, they start feeling a little bit left out, and they're like, you know what, let's try to find an alternate way up to the top of this waterfall. And so they begin scanning out across this pool at the other cliffs kind of surrounding it, and it looked like on the very other side of the pool there was a less severe cliff face that maybe they would have an easier time climbing up. And so the two women, they jump into the murky brown water and begin swimming directly across this pool towards this other cliff. And when they make it about a third of the way, Jane suddenly stops, and Ginger notices and turns around and looks at Jane, and she's like, what's going on? And Jane would tell her, you know, something just feels off. This doesn't feel right. Let's go back to the dinghy. Let's just forget about this. But Ginger is like, come on, we're so close. Let's just keep going. It'll be awesome once we get to the top of this waterfall. And so Jane, she's totally hesitant, but she says, okay, fine. And they both continue to swim. And then all of a sudden, they hear their captain, who is now on top of the waterfall, screaming down to them to get out of the water right now. And they notice he is pointing down at the pool in a direction slightly away from where they were. And so they're looking up at him, and they're following his finger down to the part of the pool he's pointing at, and they see there is this tidal wave of water coming towards them. It is a 12-foot long saltwater crocodile that has noticed them, and it is charging straight at them. Now, Jane and Ginger knew they were too far away from the dinghy to be able to swim to it before this crocodile was going to reach them, and so their next best choice was just to turn and swim towards the nearest cliff face, because again, there is no place to get out of the water. There's only cliffs. And so they swim towards this cliff face, which is right on the edge of the bottom of the waterfall, and so water is landing on them, and they reach the cliff face, and they're trying to climb up and pull themselves out of the water, but there's nowhere to grab onto. It's all totally slick. There's no good handholds, and so all they have is this little ledge that is in the water that they're standing on, but they're still halfway into the water. And so after they struggle for a minute trying to pull themselves out of the water and they realize they can't do it, they both just turn around and they lock arms and they look out through the water that's falling down in front of them into the pool, and they see this crocodile has followed them, and it is now stopped right on the other side of the water that's falling down, and it's just staring at them with its mouth wide open. And the two women are looking at it. They don't know what to do. And the captain and the other crew members, they see what's going on, and they're trying to climb down as fast as they possibly can to try to rescue them. But it's going to take several minutes minutes at least before they get down to the dinghy. And so Jane and Ginger, they're totally aware of this, and they're just staring at this crocodile, screaming at it, trying to get it to go away. And at some point, the crocodile does just close its mouth and sink below the surface. But now they don't know where it is, and this causes Ginger to completely panic, and she lets go of Jane's arm, and she dives into the water off to the right and attempts to swim away from the crocodile back over to the boat. But Ginger only made it 2 strokes before the crocodile suddenly re-emerged underneath her and grabbed her by the waist and pulled her under the water. Jane is just standing there watching all of this happen in front of her. She has no idea what to do. The crew is still not down in the dinghy, so she's totally stranded, and she's just staring at the area where Ginger has been pulled below the surface. And just seconds after she's been pulled under, the crocodile re-emerges with its head pointed towards Jane, and in its jaws is Ginger. And Ginger's got her arms up over her head, she's wide-eyed, and she's looking right at Jane. And Jane makes eye contact with her, but there's nothing she can do. And she just watched as Ginger again was pulled back under, and this time she did not come up again. Ultimately, Jane would be rescued from the ledge. The crew would get down to the dinghy, they'd swing over, they would pick her up, and then about 2 days later, they would find what was left of Ginger's remains. It would turn out the captain was well aware of the threat the crocodiles posed in this river, and he had told his crew, Ginger and Jane included, about this threat, and that at no point should anyone get in this water. But of course, his warning went unheeded. If you Google the words Burning Man and you click on images, you'll see lots of scantily clad and somewhat wild-looking people roaming around the Nevada desert on strange-looking bikes, and in the background, you'll see all these huge, bizarre statues of aliens and robots and animals, and these statues are often draped in more wild-looking people, or these statues are on fire, and these wild-looking people are dancing and rejoicing all around the flames. Based on these images, you might think Burning Man is just some totally weird substance-fueled party out in the middle of the desert. And while that is true to some degree, it's not totally accurate. Burning Man is not a party. It's actually an experiment that 70,000 people from all over the world participate in every year. The question this experiment is trying to answer is, can a random segment of the population come together and build a community out of nothing in the middle of nowhere? And can they do it while knowing at the end of Burning Man, which is always 9 days long, everything they build, the sculptures, the shelters, everything will be torn down and destroyed and erased from the planet as if it had never been there in the first place. And amazingly, year after year after year, the answer to this question is yes. Yes, they can. As soon as these 70,000 people descend on this small section of the Nevada desert, they immediately get to work helping each other, building their own sites. I mean, these people largely don't know each other, or in many cases, they don't even speak the same language, but they're showing up with this shared desire to build this temporary community. And so they begin seamlessly working together. And while shelters are being stood up all over the place, other attendees will pull out instruments and form impromptu bands, and then the artists of the group will get together and begin building these kind of strange sculptures. And so very quickly, within only a few hours, every year in Burning Man, this plot of barren desert turns into this beautiful otherworldly utopia full of totally happy and fulfilled and excited strangers. But in 2017, the utopia that was created at that Burning Man was shattered by one man, and his name was Aaron Joel. In 2017, Aaron Joel was a tall, handsome, 41-year-old free spirit who, from the time he was just a little kid, had this sort of restless energy about him. He always needed to be out doing stuff. He could never sit still. And so by the time he was old enough, he left his family home in Oklahoma and moved out to Oregon and moved into this commune. A commune is a group of people that live together and share their possessions and responsibilities. But shortly after moving into this commune, Aaron got restless again. This wasn't enough for him, and so he left the commune and began traveling all over the United States. But after he had basically gone everywhere in the country, he became restless again, and so he left the United States and he went went to Nepal and began traveling all over Nepal. And while he was there, he met this wonderful young woman from Switzerland named Ladina, and the two fell madly in love. And then when it was time for Ladina to leave Nepal and go back to her home country, Aaron followed her. And just a couple of years later, in 2014, the pair got married and they bought a house together and settled down in Switzerland. For a time, Aaron and Ladina were very happy. Their life was very simple and straightforward. They loved each other. They loved Switzerland. But in 2017, Aaron's wanderlust reared its head again. And so he went up to Ladina and he told her that, honey, I need to go out and explore again. I need to go out and be free again, even if it's just for a couple of days or a week or whatever time it is. I need it. I need it in order to be sane. I don't think Ladina was very pleased about this development. However, she knew her husband and she knew this was important to him and to his mental health. And so she said, okay, honey, you do what you have to do. And so Aaron thought about what he was going to do to satiate this desire to go out and be free again. And he settled on attending that year's Burning Man, something he had never done before. So Aaron leaves Switzerland and he goes back to Oregon in the United States. And he meets up with a very close friend of his named Justin. Justin was actually someone he had lived with in the commune when he was there. And so the two, they link up in Oregon, and from there, they drive in Justin's big van out to Nevada. And when they get to Nevada, they drive out to the Burning Man site. And as they're pulling up, they see thousands and thousands of other vans and tents and all these people that are out setting up and building this community, this utopia. And so right away, Aaron and Justin, they find their spot, they park their van, they begin to build their own site. And then after that, they pulled their bikes out of the van and began biking around, helping other people out build their sites and build the rest of the community. And so by that afternoon, Aaron and Justin had made lots of new friends and they were out partying and dancing and singing with total strangers, just totally immersed in the Burning Man experience. That night, Aaron would actually turn in early while Justin would stay up and continue having a good time with the new people he had met. Aaron was just not a night owl. He liked to get a full night's sleep and then get up early and make himself a smoothie and do yoga. And so this was very normal behavior. Justin would later say that he really looked up to Aaron. And in fact, many people that knew Aaron looked up to him because Aaron, on the one hand, was a total free spirit that would just kind of go where the wind would blow him. But at the same time, he was very regimented and disciplined. He took great care of himself, both physically and mentally, and he just seemed wise beyond his years. And he was incredibly charismatic and very funny, and so people really flocked to him and really idolized him. One of the traditions of Burning Man has to do with its namesake. Towards the end of every Burning Man, they will build this 40-foot tall wooden man effigy, and they will burn it to the ground, hence the name Burning Man. And so on the night of the so-called man burn, Aaron told Justin that he was not going to turn in early that night, that instead he was going to stay up and watch the spectacle of this effigy being burned to the ground. Justin was really excited about it, and so was Aaron. And so that evening, Aaron and Justin met up with their new friends they had met while they were at Burning Man, and their group began making their way over to the wooden man effigy. Now, this huge effigy was situated in this huge open clearing, and then standing all around this wooden man are what they called rangers. They're basically security guards for the event that also have some fire training, and they would stand almost shoulder to shoulder or very close to shoulder, facing away from the effigy, forming a perimeter around it. And the rangers' job was to prevent the crowd of 70,000 people from getting too close to the effigy when it was on fire, because it's obviously a huge hazard. And so Aaron, Justin, and their friends, when they got to this clearing and saw the effigy, they would have seen thousands and thousands of event attendees converging on this effigy, getting as close to the rangers as they possibly could on all sides. And so Aaron and Justin and their friends, they make their way up to one particular section of this crowd, and they begin fighting their way through all these people, trying to get as close to the rangers as they possibly could because they want a good view of this man burn. And then once they were satisfied with their view, they just stopped and waited for the effigy to be lit. But before the effigy was lit, Aaron would turn to Justin and say, hey, I have some friends from Switzerland who are here right now. They're on the other side of the effigy, on the other side of the crowd, and I'm going to go see them right now. And so Justin was totally bummed that Aaron was going to be leaving right before this thing is lit because he wanted to experience this with Aaron. But he said, okay, no problem. I'll see you hopefully, before this thing gets lit, or, I'll see you after this burn is done. And so Aaron departed the group and Justin watched as he kind of disappeared into the crowd. And then Justin turned his attention back towards the effigy, and a little while later, when the sun had gone down and it was totally dark out and the crowd was totally electric as they're waiting for this thing to light, finally they did. They lit the effigy, and as soon as it went up in flames, the crowd of thousands and thousands of people roared with excitement. And this whole time, Justin is totally amazed by what he is watching, but he's also scanning the crowd, kind of hoping that Aaron will eventually pop back up. But at this point, the crowd is so massive and everyone's so tight together that Justin is really not expecting Aaron to come back over to where he had been. It just didn't seem possible. And so this huge wooden man effigy goes up in glorious flames and everyone's so amazed by it. And then eventually the flames begin to dwindle down as the structure continues to burn lower and lower to the ground. And then finally, when the fire is just about out, the crowd of people begin to disperse. And at this point, Justin again looks around hoping to maybe see Aaron, but Aaron has not come back yet. And so Justin just says, okay, maybe it's time to leave and go check in with Aaron back at the van. And so he notifies his friends that he's going to turn around and head back. And as Justin turns and begins leaving the crowd, someone who was at the event, who apparently knew Justin and knew Aaron, came running over to Justin and frantically told him this totally shocking story about something that happened to Aaron. Now, at first, Justin just could not believe it. He couldn't even process it. It seemed so outlandish and unbelievable that it just could not have happened. But he was thinking to himself, I haven't seen Aaron since he left to go see his friends from Switzerland, and I have no idea where he is. And so Justin starts looking around the crowd again. He's not seeing Aaron, and he's starting to panic. And so finally, Justin just turns and starts running back towards his van in hopes that Aaron is going to be there. But when he gets back to his van, Aaron is not there, and there's no sign that Aaron has been back after they had left for the man burn. It would turn out that shocking story Justin had been told about Aaron was true. This is that shocking story. After Aaron told Justin that he was going to go to the other side of the crowd and spend some time with his friends from Switzerland, he disappeared from the group and he made his way over to that far side of the crowd. But we don't know if he actually met up with friends from Switzerland or if that was just some cover to get away from Justin and the other people he was with. But regardless, at some point, Aaron made his way over to the other side of the effigy, away from Justin and away from his other friends. And once he was over there, he pushed his way towards the front of the crowd until he was right in front of the Rangers with front row seats of the effigy. And then after the effigy was set alight and was fully engulfed in flames, Aaron, at some point, bum rushed one of the Rangers right in front of him and was able to push past him. And then before that Ranger or any other nearby Rangers could stop him, Aaron was able to sprint directly into the bottom of this massive effigy, right into the fire, and he disappeared inside of it. Because the crowd was massive and unruly and many people were under the influence of drugs or alcohol or both, because of all of that, even though Aaron is running into the fire right in front of them, it was like nobody noticed. Everybody was in kind of their own worlds, and it's dark out, there's this fire. I mean, there's so many distractions that really nobody noticed this happening besides the Rangers that were immediately affected by Aaron running past them and some of the people that were right at the front of the crowd watching as Aaron did this. And so this is why Justin and the rest of his friends had no idea this had happened, despite the fact they were watching this fire as this was happening. Aaron would ultimately only be inside of the flames for 12 seconds before the Rangers were able to go inside and pull him out. But by that time, it was already too late. Aaron would be rushed to the hospital, but he would die that night. It would later be determined that Aaron was completely sober at the time he decided to run into the burning man, which means he was of clear mind when he decided to do this. And so it was determined that his death had to be a suicide. However, his family and his friends and anybody who knew him are just totally not buying the idea that he decided to commit suicide, especially like this. It just didn't make any sense. This is not something Aaron would have done. He was acting totally normally. His behavior was not erratic. Something else must have caused this to happen. But unfortunately, at this point, no one has come close to figuring out what this other thing could be. And so to date, his death still remains largely a mystery. Here is a picture one of the bystanders took of Aaron as he charges into the fire. If you got something out of today's video and you haven't done this already, please offer to do the like button's laundry, but be sure to stop the dryer while their clothes are still slightly damp. In 2015, 29-year-old Johnny Coxey and his wife, 25-year-old Megan Coxey, were living in a low-income section of Spartanburg, South Carolina. They both struggled mightily with drug addiction to the point where it was nearly impossible to get steady work, and so they often found themselves out on the streets begging for money. Their addictions also made it nearly impossible to be a good parent to their only child. And in fact, in December of that year, Child Protective Services stepped in and took their child away from them. And if that wasn't bad enough, almost immediately after their child was taken from them, both Megan and Johnny were arrested and thrown in jail for various offenses that were connected to their drug habits. So Johnny and Megan are at absolute rock bottom at this point as they're sitting in jail, but they were about to get a big break. After they both got out of jail, they were only in jail for a couple of days, Megan was contacted by a local, very successful real estate agent named Todd Kohlhepp. Todd was someone she had met previously when she used to be a waitress at a local diner, and Todd was reaching out to her to somewhat unbelievably offer her and her husband pretty decent paying jobs. Apparently, Todd had recently purchased this massive 95-acre plot of land in the area, and he needed people to come onto the property and help clean it up and clear brush and clean some of the buildings that are on there, because his plan was to further develop this property. And so he had been reaching out to other people in Spartanburg to see if they were interested, and Megan and her husband were two people he had contacted. And so, of course, Megan and Johnny say, yes, we would love to do this job. They were in desperate need of cash, and paying jobs did not come around very often. So on December 19th of that year, Megan spoke to her mother and told her about this job opportunity and where it was and what she'd be doing, and then she and Johnny made their way out to this property, and when they got there, they saw this huge chain link fence wrapped around what seemed like a massive forest, and this forest was the 95-acre plot of land that Todd owned. And so apparently at the center of this forest were a few buildings that Johnny and Megan would be responsible for cleaning. And so they made their way down the fence line until they found the break in the fence, and that led to an access road, and they began driving down it deep into the heart of this forest. 3 days later, Megan's mother tried to get in touch with her, but she couldn't. And when she reached out to Johnny, she couldn't get in touch with him either. And so given the couple's history with drugs, Megan's mother thought the worst, that, maybe they overdosed. And so she panics and she rushes to Megan and Johnny's house. They're not there. And so something in her gut tells her that something is wrong here. It's not common for them to just completely go off the grid. And so she called the police. The police began their investigation by speaking to Todd Kohlhepp, who was the owner of this property, because presumably he was one of the last people to see them before they went missing. But when they spoke to Todd, he said, look, I had limited interaction with them. They were on my property. They came out, they cleaned these two buildings on my property, and then I paid them and they left. And we haven't had any contact since. So, unfortunately, I don't have a clue where they would have gone next. And so at this point, the police decide their best bet is just to wait and see what happens. Although they did not tell Johnny or Megan's families this, the police force did have a running suspicion that, it was possible, if not likely, that the couple had used the money from cleaning up this property to go buy drugs, and then they went on a drug binge, and they would either turn up in a couple of days alive or dead from an overdose. But a couple of days went by, and the couple did not reemerge, and no one had any idea where they were. And then a couple of weeks went by, and then a couple of months went by, and it wasn't long before the case went cold. But it would not stay cold for very long. On August 31st, 2016, so roughly 8 months after the Coxies were reported missing, 2 more residents of Spartanburg went missing as well. They were 30-year-old Kayla Brown and her boyfriend, 32-year-old Charlie Carver. The pair had only been dating for about a month, but they were becoming quite serious, with Charlie already introducing Kayla to his family, a step that Charlie's father said was a very big deal for him. Unlike the Coxies, Kayla and Charlie were not struggling with drug addiction or with financial issues. They were actually pretty well off. Charlie worked full-time operating a printer at a local business, and Kayla made a living by doing odd jobs around town. According to their families, it seemed like the couple was very happy with their lives and the directions they were going. But starting on the evening of August 31st, Kayla and Charlie stopped returning text messages or answering phone calls. Charlie's father was especially close with Charlie, and so this sudden silence was immediately noticed by him, but he kind of ruled it out and thought, you know what, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for why he's not texting me back, and so, I'll hear from him over the next couple of days. But over the next couple of days, Charlie continued not to answer text messages or pick up phone calls, same with Kayla, and so after 48 hours of this total silence, Charlie's father finally hopped in his car and drove to his son's house to see if he was there, and he wasn't. And then he drove to Kayla's place, and she wasn't there either. And so none of it made any sense, and so he called the police and he reported them missing. The police started with absolutely no leads, and so what they did to begin their investigation was basically just to interview everybody in Charlie and Kayla's life. Friends, family, acquaintances, employers, co-workers, everyone, but no one had any idea where this couple had gone to. They had not told anyone about some trip they were going on or something they were going to do. It just seemed like they had vanished. And so initially, this investigation really got nowhere. But 2 months after they had been reported missing, the police finally obtained a search warrant that would allow them to look at their respective cell phone records. And when they looked at Kayla's cell phone records, they were able to triangulate roughly where her last known location was, according to pings her cell phone was sending off to nearby cell phone towers. And they discovered her last known location, at least of her cell phone, was inside of the same 95-acre plot of land that the Coxies had been in before they went missing. And so immediately the police put in for a search warrant to go search this 95-acre property, and they sent a team actually out to the property, and they actually set up outside of that big fence and just waited for the search warrant to clear. And at the same time, another group of police officers went to Todd Kohlhepp's house, which was actually in town about 20 minutes away from this property, to talk to him about why in the world Kayla's cell phone would be pinging inside of his property. And so when the police arrive at his front doorstep, Todd is obviously caught off guard by suddenly there being all these police officers. And he does understand very quickly how unbelievably suspicious it looks that now you have potentially 2 couples that have gone onto his property right before they vanished. And so he says to them, look, I know how this looks, but I gotta tell you, I did hire Kayla and her boyfriend did come along with her. She went onto my property. She did some work for me. She cleaned up some stuff, cleared some brush, and then I paid them and then they left. That is the last I saw of them. I have no idea why her phone would be on my property. At the same time, the team of police officers were kind of grilling Todd at his house. The other team that was outside of the 95-acre property, they found out their search warrant had been granted. And so they flew through the gate, they got on that access road, and they began bombing into this huge forest. And as they're driving, they pull out their maps they had printed out that showed the rough estimation of where her final location was within this property. And it looked like the last spot was inside of a clearing. And so as they're driving down this access road through all these trees, they see up ahead, there is a clearing, and it looks very much like the clearing on their map where this final location is. And when they pull into the clearing, off to the left side of the road are these 2 green buildings. The left building was like a shed, like something you might keep yard tools in, like lawnmowers and shovels and rakes, that kind of thing. And then right next to it on the right was this metal shipping container, and it had all these metal chains and 5 padlocks keeping it shut. Now, of course, the police are thinking, oh my goodness, is Kayla inside one of these buildings? Because this is probably where her last location was. And so right away, the police went inside of the left building, the shack, because it was easier to get into. There weren't padlocks all over it. And when they got inside, there really was nothing of note. Kayla was not in there. Charlie was not in there. There was no cell phone in there. it was just gardening tools. And so they went over to the right building, the shipping container, and they got out their metal cutting saws and their bolt cutters, and they began cutting into all of these locks and chains. And when they finally got that door open, they were absolutely astounded at what they saw inside.
Right up on it. Give him a video. Yes.
Pull that one first.
All right, let them get ready.
Everybody,
Y'all ready?
everybody.
Come on, guys. Back.
It's jammed in here.
Give me that crowbar back.
Where's that? Get
Pump it
that
off
big
right
crowbar.
here.
Right here.
Oh, John. Put it down here.
Yeah, behind there you go.
Watch out. Y'all move. I got it. Watch out, boss.
Joey.
Sheriff's officer.
Sheriff's officer.
What?
Grab that.
Back up there, buddy.
Just one. Are you okay?
Grab what? Go.
Do you have any weapons? Coming through, okay?
What's your name? What's your name, man?
Lauren.
Gotcha. All right. Just a girl. Just a girl. Just a girl. How are you, honey? This is bolt cutters. This is our investigator. He's a paramedic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna get you out of there. Okay.
Just hang loose for me.
Anybody got? I need a handcuff key.
The police had just discovered Kayla. She was in rough shape, and she had a metal chain wrapped around her neck that was anchored to the wall, and she was handcuffed, but she was alive. And after they cut her free and got her out of the shipping container, she told them what happened. She said back on August 31st, 2016, so this was the same day that Charlie's father had realized his son was not responding to his text messages, and when he was calling Kayla, she wasn't answering either. So on that day, Kayla says she was contacted by a friend of hers, Todd Colehep, and he told her that he was still looking for people to come out and help clean up the property because he was getting ready to develop it. And so Kayla, she was looking for work, and so she agreed to do it. And after getting this job, Kayla would tell Charlie, and Charlie, just being a good boyfriend, said, you know what, I'll tag along with you and I'll help you do this job. I won't ask Todd for any money. I'm just gonna go and help you. And so Kayla was totally thrilled about this. And so later that day, she and Charlie, they made their way out to the 95-acre property. They reached that fence that kind of borders the entire property. They followed it until they hit that break in the fence. They hopped on the access road and they began driving into the heart of this very thick forest. And after driving for several minutes, they reached this clearing. And in this clearing, they see Todd up ahead on the left. He's smiling and waving at them. And he's standing in front of the shack and the metal shipping container. And so Charlie pulls the car in right in front of Todd. And then Charlie and Kayla, they get out. They walk up to Todd to, see what he needs, see what he wants them to do. And as soon as the couple is standing in front of Todd, Todd just casually pulls out a gun and shoots Charlie 3 times in the chest. And as soon as Charlie falls to the ground, Todd aims the gun at Kayla and says, if you go anywhere, I will kill you and I will kill your family. And then he put the gun away, walked over to Charlie, and he wrapped him up in a blue tarp, and then he carried his lifeless body and dumped him in the nearby bucket of a tractor. And then Todd just walked back over to Kayla, who's witnessed this entire thing. She is so terrified she can't even move, and she's just staring at Todd. And Todd draws his gun again at her and orders her to go into the shipping container. So he brings her inside, he locks her up, and for 65 days, she would remain his prisoner. And over the course of those 65 days, Todd would once or twice a day come down and do whatever he wanted with her. And he told her at the outset that if she ever tried to resist him in any way and didn't do whatever he wanted with her, he would not only kill her, he would also kill her family. And so Kayla very early on decided she would not put up a fight. She just kind of accepted that this was her life, that she would be horribly mistreated, and then probably at some point he would grow tired of her and kill her, but at least she would be sparing her family. And so when the police finally went into that shipping container, Kayla truly did not expect ever to be rescued. So when you watch that video, you need to understand that was someone who believed she was 100% going to die inside of that space. And so after Kayla tells the police officers this totally horrible and traumatic story, they immediately radio over to the other team of police officers that were still at Todd Colehep's residence, still talking to him, and they tell them, hey, this is what Kayla just told us. Todd's reaction to this news was also captured on video.
We have Kayla. Excuse me? We have Kayla in your property. She was locked in a container, okay? She has told us that you shot and killed Charlie. Why did you shoot him?
I didn't shoot anybody, sir.
Okay, why'd you lock her in a container in your property? She's on your property right now, locked in a container. She's saying you buried Charlie's body on that property. So you're saying you didn't lock her up, you didn't put her in the Connex box or anything? Probably a good thing. Go ahead and put him in the back of your car.
Even though Todd would initially deny any wrongdoing and would claim he had nothing to do with what happened to Kayla or Charlie, he would eventually confess not only to killing Charlie and kidnapping Kayla, but also to killing Johnny and Megan Coxey. Apparently, he had done to them what he did to Kayla and Charlie. He had lured the Coxeys onto his property on the promise of work, and then when they reached those two structures, he drew a gun and he shot Johnny and killed him, and then he ordered Megan to go inside of the shipping container. Now, unlike Kayla, who would ultimately comply, and it did save her life, Megan did not. She fought back. She was totally resistant. She wouldn't do anything that he wanted her to do. And so after only 5 days of her being in captivity, he would kill her. And the way he would describe her was, oh, you know, she was acting like a wild animal, so I had to put a bullet in the back of her head. He didn't care at all about these people he had killed. Charlie, Johnny, and Megan's bodies would all be discovered in shallow graves right outside of that shipping container. Knowing he was potentially facing the death penalty and wanting to avoid that, Todd told police after he had confessed to these murders that he could actually confess to even more murders, and if he did, could they take the death penalty off the table? And so the police ultimately would agree, and Todd would tell them that back in 2003, he had walked into a motorbike shop and killed 4 of their staff members. Apparently, a couple of days earlier, they had offended him in some way. He had gone in there and they had kind of made some snide remark about how he was bad at riding motorcycles. It was kind of in good fun. It was not meant to be very mean, but Todd had taken it as an absolute offense and he could not stand for it. And so literally in broad daylight, he had walked back into this store and gunned all of them down. And then once they were all down, he had walked by each of them and put an additional round into each of their heads. And so as Todd is telling the police this terrible story, he's totally nonchalant about it. He's laughing about it, and he's even bragging to police that they would be proud of him at how quickly he cleared the superbike shop, meaning how quickly he got in there and killed everyone inside. That somehow, because police officers use weapons too, they would appreciate how efficient he was. These 4 murders would be the only additional murders Todd would confess to, and they would be enough to take the death penalty off the table. But it's believed Todd had killed more people. In fact, he had blatantly admitted to Kayla when she was in captivity that his body count was in the high 2 digits. And most likely he was telling her this because he planned on killing her before she could ever escape and tell anyone. But of course, she was rescued, and so the world now knows. However, if Todd never confesses to any more murders, there's a very good chance we'll never know about them. One of the more disturbing aspects of this case is after it became public that Todd Kohlhepp was the killer, someone discovered that an anonymous account was doing all these product reviews on Amazon, and this anonymous account was Todd Kohlhepp. And the products he was reviewing were things like knives and shovels and chainsaws, and the reviews literally were about how he planned on using these tools to kill people, or they were how he had used these tools to kill people, or how he had disposed of bodies. And then there was also a couple of reviews of padlocks, and one of the reviews said he had 5 of them on a shipping container, and so now the shipping container was just like Hotel California. Hotel California is the famous song by the band The Eagles, and in this song, the famous line is, "You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave." Todd was ultimately sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences, which means he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please draw a gun on the like button and force them to retie your untied shoelaces right after you've stomped around inside of the bathroom of an outdoor music festival. Fair warning, the ending to this story is very abrupt and very upsetting. Strongsville, Ohio used to be just another typical quiet American suburb. Nice homes, nice families, nice restaurants, and a mall. But in late 2017, a discovery was made in Strongsville that put this town on the map in the worst way possible. To understand this discovery, we need to go back to early 2016 when this town's nightmare began. In early 2016, two longtime Strongsville residents, Bruce and Melinda Pleskovic, received some very exciting news. Their 20-year-old daughter named Anna and her 20-year-old fiance named Jeff had just told them they were expecting a baby girl. And so Bruce and Melinda were totally excited about the prospect of finally becoming grandparents, but at the same time, they knew Anna and Jeff did not have very much money. Anna still lived at home with Bruce and Melinda. She did have a job, but she made very little money. She was a waitress at a local Applebee's restaurant. And as for Jeff, he had a better job working as a service technician for a heating and air company, but he didn't have enough money to support him and Anna. In fact, he didn't even have enough money to move out of his parents' home. He was still living with them on the other side of Strongsville. And so this couple, they're really excited about their baby, but Bruce and Melinda are thinking, you know, we really got to find a way to support them because they are just not prepared for this first child. And so Bruce and Melinda, they talked it over and they decided the best way to support this young couple was to tell their daughter if she wanted to, she could invite Jeff to come stay at their house. That way the two of them could be together, and once they had their daughter, Bruce and Melinda could be the great-grandparents and help take care of the baby. And in general, this would allow the couple to just continue to save money and move out when they were ready. And so when they told Anna they were willing to do this, Anna was so happy, she was so grateful. She called Jeff, and Jeff was equally happy and grateful and said, yes, I would love to move in with you guys. So it took several months, but finally in June of 2016, which was the same month that Jeff and Anna welcomed their daughter to the world, Jeff would leave his parents' home and move into Bruce and Melinda's home. And almost immediately after he moved in, he and the rest of Anna's family began experiencing some very strange and disturbing things around their property. Just a few days after Jeff had moved in, he and Anna were home alone. They were on the main floor of the house and they were having dinner at the kitchen table. And at some point, Jeff just happened to glance out one of the back windows that looked out into their backyard. And now this property had this huge sprawling backyard. Basically, they had all these houses kind of in a row, and they all had almost like a communal backyard, this big open space. And so Jeff is looking out into this huge backyard, and he sees off in the distance something strange. He doesn't really know what he's looking at because it's nighttime, it's dark, but he stands up and he walks over to the window, and as he's looking out, he sees way off on the backside of their property are these four strangers just standing there, appearing to be smoking something, and they're just kind of looking up at the Pleskovic house. And so Jeff is looking out the window at these four, not really sure what to make of them, and he calls Anna over, and so Anna walks over, and the two of them are looking out, not really sure what to do. I mean, on the one hand, these four people who they clearly didn't know, or they believed they didn't know, were definitely trespassing. But at the same time, they weren't really doing anything. They were just kind of standing there smoking. But as they're watching these four people, one of them begins walking up the property towards their home and then stops alongside the Pleskovic trampoline, which was in their backyard. And this person begins fiddling with the trampoline. And so at this, Anna's like, you know what? I don't know what they're doing. I feel totally uncomfortable. And so Anna would actually call the police. And so the police, they come out. But by the time the squad car arrived in front of the Pleskovic house, the four people in back must have seen the car and they took off running. And so when the police officer went in the backyard and looked around, there was no one there, and there was also no sign they were there. There was no dropped cigarette butts or anything. They just kind of vanished. And so the police officer told Jeff and Anna, if they come back, let us know. And so the officer left. And then a little while later, when Bruce and Melinda came home, Jeff and Anna would tell them about what happened, and they would agree that that was totally strange, that in all the decades they had lived in Strongsville, they had never had anybody stroll onto their property and just loiter in the middle of the night. And so for the next couple of days, the family was definitely on edge, but after a little while, this whole incident was largely forgotten about. Fast forward about 5 months to November 2016, and Anna was home alone with her young daughter, and she's playing with her daughter on the first floor of the house towards the front of the house. And as she's playing with her daughter, she suddenly hears what sounds like someone trying to open the back sliding glass door on the back of the house. And so instinctively, Anna thinks, okay, Jeff must be out there, or my parents must be out there, and they don't have a key or something. something. And so she scoops up her daughter and she begins walking towards the back of the house to open this door for them. And when she walks into one of the back rooms, before she reaches the back door, she happens to look out one of the windows that looked out into the backyard. And standing right up against the glass is this unknown male figure with his face pressed up against the glass. And so Anna just freezes and stares at this guy. And then this guy, he notices Anna and he ducks down out of view. And now Anna's thinking to herself, this is the guy. He must have been trying to break in my back door. I'm home alone. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if he's going to try to break in again. And so she just turns and runs back towards the front of the house. She runs upstairs. She goes in a bedroom. She locks the door and she calls the police. But by the time the police come out there and they look around, they can't find this unknown figure that was at the back of the house. And there's no sign of an attempted forced entry. And so unfortunately, they told her, look, I'm sure this was very traumatic for you, but there's really nothing we can do here. There's no evidence to suggest who did this. And so please just, keep your house locked. And if you see anybody suspicious on your property, call us back. And so naturally, after the police left and Anna had a chance to contact Jeff and her parents, they were horrified and they rushed home to comfort her. And then after the initial shock of this incident had worn off, the family began to speculate, do you think this might be connected to those 4 strangers we saw on our property a few months ago? It just seems odd that those 2 things would happen so close together. And then the family began to think, okay, well then who is this person? Who are these people? What do they want? Why are they targeting us? What's going on? Because as it was, the Pleskovic family, they didn't have any enemies, at least none that they knew of. If anything, the people of Strongsville adored this family, especially Melinda, the mother. For the past 20 plus years, she had been a middle school teacher in town and her students adored her. She was also a big time soccer coach in the community because she had played in college and she was still very passionate about it. So she was this amazing coach. And in the eyes of many parents in the Strongsville community, Melinda was a bit of an inspiration because she was not only the mother to Anna, she was also the mother of an 18-year-old boy named Kyle who had Down syndrome and was nonverbal. And Melinda just had this unbelievable way with him where she was so good to him. She incorporated him in everything. She got him so involved. She gave him the best life he could possibly have. And so anytime you saw Kyle with his mother, Kyle would be all smiles. Even though Kyle couldn't speak, it was so obvious his mother made him incredibly happy. But regardless of the reason for these strangers to be lurking around their property, the Pleskovic family was now totally on edge and found themselves constantly looking out the windows, especially at night, in fear these strangers were going to come back and might try to break in again. And unfortunately, these strangers would come back. In January of 2017, so 2 months after Anna saw that unknown figure at the window and heard the back door sliding around, Bruce's car was broken into. It was sitting in the driveway of their property. Someone got inside of it and stole his laptop. And so Bruce, he calls the police and he says, I've got to believe this has to do with the people that are harassing my family. And the police believed him and they began looking around and asking around, but they could never track down the laptop or the thief. And so once again, the family was kind of left on their own. And the police said, look, if you see anything else, let us know. But there's not much we can do here. A few months later, in July of that year, Anna, Jeff, and their daughter were all home together one night when Anna happened to look out one of the back windows on their first floor, and out on the very back of the property were 3 strangers just standing in that same spot where they saw those 4 strangers smoking the year before. And these 3 strangers are just standing there looking up at the house. And so horrified, Anna calls out to Jeff and says, look, there are 3 people in the back of our property. And so Anna, she pulls out her phone and she's calling the police. And as she's calling the police, Jeff, who's totally upset that there are these people harassing him and his family and making them feel unsafe, he just grabs a flashlight and storms out the back door to go confront these people. But as soon as Jeff went out the back door, before he could even shine the light on them, the 3 people had turned and ran and vanished. And so finally, when the police did show up, they were aware of all the calls they had gotten from this family. And so they went out there and they did a serious search for these 3 strangers, but like always, nothing was found. And so the family once again was told, If you see anything else, let us know. The following month, which was August, Anna was home with her daughter, along with her mother, who was upstairs. And as Anna is in the front of the house in the playroom with her daughter, she hears the sound of somebody trying to open that back sliding door. And now immediately her radar is up because she knows what happened the last time she heard the sound. There was that person in the window. But she's thinking, okay, I can't just immediately call the police. I need to at least look and see if there's someone that I know at the back door. And so she scoops her daughter up, she stands up, and she walks around to the edge of the room she's in, and she kind of peeks her head down this hallway that will give her a clear view of this backsliding glass door. And once she finally has a full view of whoever is there, she screams because there are two large adults, as she would say, standing at the back door trying to force open this door. And so when she screams, these two strangers, they hear it, they turn around and they run. And Melinda, she was upstairs, she hears her daughter screaming, she comes flying downstairs, she's trying to figure out what's going on. Anna is hysterical, the baby's crying, and so Melinda actually calls the police about what her daughter has just seen. The police come out, they search the property, they can't find anyone, and so again, the police leave and they tell the family, look, I'm sorry this is happening to you, but we can't do anything. So please just let us know if anything else happens, and we'll be out here as soon as we can. We're bound to catch these people, but right now we just don't have much to operate on. The following month, which was September, one of Melinda's car keys would go missing. And whoever had these keys, whoever had stolen these keys, would use it to randomly start Melinda's car in the middle of the night. And they also used it to set off her car alarm at odd hours of the night. And then also during this time frame that her keys were missing, they also discovered that there were nails jammed into the tires of Bruce's car. And so, of course, the family calls the police and tells them about what's going on, but the police can't do anything. And so, very frustrated, Melinda actually takes to Facebook and posts that someone's stolen her keys and please just give them back. And just overall, she's pleading with whoever is harassing her family to just leave them alone. But unfortunately, this post would not do anything. The harassment would continue. A month later, on October 19th, Jeff was home alone when he heard the sound of the backsliding glass door rattling, and now he knows that every time this has been heard by Anna, that there's always some stranger at the back door. And so Jeff grabs the family dog and he very carefully turns and looks down that hallway towards the back door to see who this is, and right as he pokes his head out, he sees there's this large adult figure with a hood up trying to open this back door. And so the dog sees this person and starts barking and running towards the door. Jeff runs after the dog, and this big person outside who's trying to break in, he sees the dog, he sees Jeff running, and he turns and he runs away. And so Jeff and the dog, they stay inside the house and they watch this guy just take off across the property and disappear into the trees. And Jeff would call the police, but like always, the police came out and there just was nothing they could do. 4 days later, on October 23rd, Jeff, along with his young daughter and Bruce, they went to the local Applebee's where Anna worked to have dinner there and have Anna wait on them. And then after they were done eating, they said their goodbyes to Anna, they left the restaurant, they hopped in their cars, and they drove back to their house. When they got there, Bruce was the first up the steps, and he got to the front door and it was locked, and so he knocked, and Kyle, his son, he came and unlocked the door. Bruce went inside, followed closely behind by Jeff, who was holding his daughter. They get inside, and Bruce walks through the house to the back of the house where the kitchen is. He flips on the lights, and there's something on the kitchen floor. And when Jeff sees it, he immediately turns around and runs out of the house carrying his daughter. He grabs Kyle along the way and just takes them straight out of the house. And then once Jeff was outside, he called 911. And when you listen to his 911 call, it sounds like Jeff is unable to process what he has just seen.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
Somebody's been attacked in my house.
Somebody's been what?
Attacked.
They attacked who? Who was attacked?
Mel Pleskovic. Mel Pleskovic was attacked.
He was attacked by whom? Do you know?
She was. No, we just came home. She's on the kitchen floor.
Jeff and Bruce had just discovered Melinda lying on the kitchen floor. She'd been stabbed over 35 times and shot 3 times. She would be rushed to the hospital, but she would die that night. Although the family was in shock and couldn't even begin to process what had just happened, they were all acutely aware that whoever had done this to Melinda had to be connected to all of these strange and suspicious people that had been lurking around their property for the better part of 2 years. In fact, literally after Jeff had called 911, Bruce was inside in the kitchen kneeling next to his dying wife, and he called 911 and he would tell the dispatcher that the Strongsville Police Department really dropped the ball.
911, what city is the emergency in?
Please come to 1 for Blazing Star. I think my wife's dead. Someone, we've had people breaking into our fucking house,
sir,
and now someone killed her.
Sir, tell me the city you need to talk to.
Strongsville, Ohio.
Okay, you need to be transferred. Don't hang up.
911, what's the city of your emergency?
Strongsville, Ohio. We have people on the way already.
What's the address?
For Blazing Star. I think someone killed my wife.
You think someone killed your wife?
Yeah, it looks like she has stab wounds on her back. We've had people trying to break into our house all year.
Sir, I need to ask you questions, okay? Are you there right now?
I just got in the door with my new son-in-law. My son Kyle was here with her.
Sir, what I want you to do is walk outside.
The Strongsville Police Department would come out in force for this case, and they would solve it in just 4 days. And when they went public with who killed Melinda, no one could believe it. Back on October 23rd, so this was the night Melinda was discovered, Jeff, along with his young daughter and Melinda and her son Kyle, they were all together in the house. And at some point, Jeff had put his daughter down in her playpen and then went into the kitchen where Melinda was. And he walked up to her, pulled out a knife, and stabbed her over 35 times. And then when Melinda fell to the ground, Jeff drew a gun and shot her 3 additional times to make sure she was dead. Now, while he was doing this, his daughter is literally just a few feet away, and Kyle, presumably, is also right nearby, but he has no way of understanding what's happening to his mother. And so with these 2 totally innocent lives just right nearby, Jeff would clean off his weapons, and he'd take off his bloody clothes, and he would hide them inside of his car, and then he would just scoop up his daughter, and he would leave the house, leaving Kyle alone in the house with his dying mother in the kitchen, just leaves him there, shuts the door, locks it, and then Jeff and his daughter would drive to Applebee's to have dinner with Melinda's husband and her daughter. And then after several hours, when they got back to the property, Jeff knew what was waiting for them inside, and he still allowed Bruce to go inside first and discover his dying wife on the kitchen floor. Very little is known about why Jeff did this, because Jeff has actually never come out and given his motive for the crime. The running theory is that Jeff actually was not going to be able to pay for the wedding, which was coming up in a couple of days, and the wedding venue had actually contacted Melinda and said, hey, we're canceling the wedding because your future son-in-law can't pay for it. And so Melinda apparently confronted Jeff about his financial troubles, and the theory is he snapped and killed her. However, that can't possibly be the entire story for why he did this, because it would turn out Jeff was found to be responsible for literally every single suspicious event that had taken place around the Pleskovic property leading up to the attack. Meaning, every time they had seen strangers lurking around their property or people trying to break into their house, that had been because of Jeff. Either it was literally Jeff outside being one of these suspicious people, or he had asked friends or hired someone or groups of people to pretend to be suspicious people on the property, or Jeff had been the only person to see these suspicious people, and then miraculously when other people attempted to look outside, they were gone. And so obviously Jeff was lying. And so I actually had the opportunity to speak with one of Jeff's childhood friends who was actually living roughly in the Strongsville area when this horrible murder took place. And what this person told me is that what is kind of generally accepted as why Jeff did this, according to the people in Strongsville, is that Jeff apparently loathed Melinda. Even though she had opened her house to him, he loathed her. And as soon as he moved in 2016, he began plotting to kill her. And so all of these suspicious events were Jeff's attempt at building this really intricate alibi that they had these strangers out out there that were targeting this family, and so that when she would ultimately be killed by him, it would look like these strangers had done it. And at first, it totally worked. Everybody believed, the police, the family, friends, that strangers had broken into the house and killed Melinda. In fact, there was so little suspicion on Jeff after her murder that Jeff actually served as a pallbearer in Melinda's funeral. But ultimately, the police would discover the knife and some bloody clothes in the back of Jeff's car, and so they would arrest him and they would present this mountain of evidence against him, and Jeff would confess to killing Melinda. However, he wouldn't give any additional information about the crime. He would just basically say, yes, I did kill her. He would also never give an apology or explanation to the family. He would ultimately be sentenced to life in prison with the opportunity for parole after 33 years. During Jeff's trial, there was this totally heartbreaking moment when Bruce, Melinda's husband, spoke, and he would say their son, Kyle, does not understand that his mother is gone. And so now, every time they go out to eat, which is something Kyle really likes to do and he used to love doing with his mother, he'll just sit and stare out the window, eagerly expecting his mother to show up any minute. But of course, she never does. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please offer to curl the like button's hair for their wedding, but then repeatedly touch the top of their ear with the curling iron.